Okay, agarazzo.
Agarazzo.
I buy.
By.
On.
On.
A particle that adds contingency. That's pretty good, huh? So, is that your first particle?
Yes.
Wow.
Uh-oh. And we're doing 3 lessons today? Yeah. Uh-oh.
No, we're getting
Huh?
we're doing 3.
Well, these are easy lessons. All right, graphe. Writing. Et-on. If, notice that it is a, which we already know, if, plus on, that particle that adds contingency or indefiniteness. Hinna. In order that, so that. Now, hinna is used with the subjunctive. Hinna is not used with the indicative mood. So remember these little things. If you have hinna, you know, you're outside the indicative. That helps your parsing, doesn't it? If you have may, that means you're outside the indicative. That helps your parsing. If you have hati instead of hinna, right, it means you're in the indicative. If you have ooh, that means you're in the indicative. So that helps your parsing. Those little clues for you. Kome. Village. Made. And not, nor, not even. Meketi.
Subjunctive.
Huh?
If they say plus subjunctive, that means they're only.
Yeah, anytime you have may,
Does it mean only subjunctive, or does it mean not indicative?
not indicative.
Does it mean participles and things like that, or would it?
I think you're going to see it mostly with the subjunctive because of the nature of the translation.
Subjunctive.
You know, anytime you have may, you can see that may and de, right? It's just those two words stuck together to mean and not, right? So anytime you have may in a compound word, you know you're not going to be in the indicative mood. I mean, there are always exceptions to rules, but that's a rule. So meketi, no longer, you're not going to be in the indicative mood. Subjunctive. Hapos. In order that.
What, I have a question.
Yes, sir.
What would be the distinction between that and in its usage?
It's less frequent for one thing. It's a synonym, basically. So it's a lot less frequent than him. But apart from that, I can give you a better answer at this moment. Hatan. Whenever. So here we see hate, down below, meaning when, and you add on to make it hatan, and you get whenever.
Yes.
You know, that's one of my pet peeves when people misuse the indefinite whenever in English. Now, you know, now you have an utter misuse of it when people are saying whatever, you know. But I don't mean that. When someone says, whenever I was 12, you know, that grates my nerves to no end. Because if you don't know when you were 12, you better stop and figure out when you were 12, right? It's when I was 12. Or whenever I went to the store, you got a bad memory. You need to remember when you went to the store. That's definite in your mind, I hope, right? Huh?
You can say whenever I go to the store, it's not whenever I went.
Yeah, indefinite means it's in the future. Whenever I go to the store, I always buy eggs.
But it could be in the past, because you can say whenever I go to the store, like you talk about those times.
Well, you could say whenever I went to the store in 1956, I always bought eggs. But that's indefinite. But if you said, whenever I went to the store, I bought you this. People do that. It drives me nuts. Huh? I bought you this. Here.
I know.
All right? Uk-eti. Now, what does eti mean?
Yes.
Yet or still. Put oo and uk because it
Not yet.
begins with it. It means not yet or still, right? So, no longer. Hos. As, how, that, about. All right? So, learn these words. You know, this particle on, remember that it is going to occur always outside the indicative mood. Now, you never want to say always. You never want to say always when you're talking grammar, because there are always exceptions. So whenever I say always, know that there could be exceptions, but they're probably very rare. All right? So, on in a word or by itself is going to tell you that you're outside the indicative mood. So just remember that.
Can you think of an example where on would be used by itself? I mean, maybe there's some injury, but.
What does particle mean? Does that mean like it's a
There
big
are.
word?
I'd have to find a concordance or look on the computer. Actually, I don't have a verse right in my mind, right off the top of my head, where on is used by itself. But there are verses. Yes.
I'm just trying to figure out where it was.
Yeah.
You probably see it.
On is usually just at the end of the word. Is that what we're saying?
Well, I wouldn't say it's limited to being at the end of the word, but it is on these.
Well, in practice review number 3, it has Hapu on ace or
Hapu. Yeah, no, it's not Hapu. It's
Yeah,
Hapu.
I'm looking at 3 now.
ace L beta. So Hapu is where, right?
Wherever.
So would that be wherever?
Right.
Okay. Thanks.
You know, I took Spanish for like 4 years, and I definitely know Greek better than I know Spanish.
Seriously?
Yeah, for sure. Like, just the teaching is so much better in Seminary than it was in high school.
I took French for 9
Well,
years.
you know.
And I can say it with a couple words.
Yeah.
Then
Sentences.
you know, you're having some of the best. You know, what
Yeah.
can you say?
Yeah.
I mean, you know, you almost have to try not to learn it in here, right?
They just expect us to learn a lot faster, and it helps, I think.
Does it really? Well, remember, Dr. House, including himself, you know, he's put together quite an impressive group of people. He's quite an impressive man, you know, to have been taught Greek by Wayne House, you know. You ought to figure out a way to put that in your office somehow on the wall so that people will know that.
Get your picture taken.
Yeah, yeah. Have it framed.
Should I put in the church record?
I have a picture of him talking about his.
Okay, the subjunctive mood. I don't know. I'm not really terribly thrilled with how he deals with the issue of the subjunctive mood in here, but the subjunctive mood is the mood of probability, and the word might is very useful to translate the subjunctive. Although probably most of the time you're not going to end up with might in a good translation, but it helps you understand what the subjunctive mood is all about. A different mood, right? So I can have a present, active, subjunctive. Right? I can have an aorist, active, middle or passive, subjunctive. The endings are fairly easy to deal with because all you do is take the regular primary endings and lengthen the coupling time. So O becomes what? O. Now that's an ambiguous form, isn't it? So context is going to have to tell you whether that is subjunctive or indicative. But the rest of them lengthen O, ace, A. Now they sound alike, don't they? But they're not. Instead of being epsilon iota, they are eta, iota subscript. O, ace, A, omen, eta, OC. I'm getting a vision. I can see these things on a quiz. Let's see.
Do visions always come true?
Pretty often. Especially those kind.
Yeah, I was about to say.
All right, the forms of the present middle passive. Well, I'm used to amai a etai. Guess what I get here? Omai a etai. Ometha aista omtai. Fairly simple, right?
How far does your vision go?
Just about a week.
I mean, like, how
This
much
list.
it is?
Oh, the list?
Your
Oh,
vision?
the list, the whole list. I mean,
Sure, that's a vision.
I'm beginning to be embarrassed that this is so easy, to be honest. Because pretty soon, everybody's going to want to be a pastor. We'll be out of a job.
Yeah, I'm ashamed.
You know, if guys with real personalities want to be pastors, we'd be fine. Well, if you have a real personality, you're never going to take the time to learn Greek, are you? I'm sorry,
You
Jim.
have a good idea with that.
Well, I'm sure losing tonight.
Yeah. Well, I put myself in your same category, that's why. The only reason I would say something so mean. I'm only teasing, we do have personalities. That's why you're such raving successes. All right, the aorist subjunctive. I'm in a hole I'm never going to get out of. The aorist active subjunctive is the same as the present, only you add the temporal infix we're used to with the aorist. So say, somen, seta, soci. Right? What do you do for the middle? Somai, say, setai, somata, ses, the sontai, which is the same as my present middle passive subjunctive ending, but with a sigma temporal infix on it. Now, I'm learning very little new here. Do you see that? Can you see it? Can you feel it? Can you feel the love in this?
You're right.
But notice my aorist endings are primary still, aren't they? I'm used to secondary endings for my aorist, but they're primary, which really makes it easier. And then for my aorist passive, it's the same ending again as my active ending, only with a theta temporal infix. So tho, thes, the, thomen, theta, osi. So those are actually just the aorist active endings with a lisp, if you will. Those. So. All right, so that's fairly easy, isn't it?
They use everything except for first person and third person plural. In some ways.
First person.
Singular plural and third person plural. They always have a mavis instead of betas.
Oh yeah, but that's just because we're used to the O class vowel there in our regular one, right? The O, ace, a, amen, eta, usi, and usi goes to osi.
Or like even in Paris, it's usually like alpha and some.
Yeah, yeah, but that's built off secondary endings. The on s, on endings, sa, se, samen, seta, sam, right? Those are secondary endings. These are primary endings. O, ace, a, amen, eta, usi. Right? Only link them. Does that make sense? Okay.
I think if I understood why there's not any features of these, then that would help me understand subjunctive.
Ah! All right, good. Remember to ask me that when we finish talking about the subjunctive. Okay, so that's a perfect question. But let's talk about the subjunctive, the uses of it, before we do. Anybody having any struggle with these endings? They're fairly easy to recognize because we already know, we can already recognize OSA and amai a etai fairly easily. It's not that hard to see that the coupling vowel is lengthened. I'm already used to sigma, aorist temporal infix. I'm already used to theta as an aorist passive temporal infix. So they're fairly easy to recognize. If I had a future subjunctive, what would the endings look like?
Would they have a
Like the ears.
Like the aorist. Ah! So that gives you a bit of a clue as to what's going on here, right? Now, a subjunctive is the mood of potentiality. Now, you need to understand, remember that we've been saying that Greek tenses, what's the primary point of a Greek tense?
kind of action?
Kind of action. Kind of action. Everybody got that?
Yeah.
Okay, the primary significance of a Greek tense is kind of action. There are three kinds of action primarily, right? Durative action, undefined action or punctiliar action, and perfective action. Right? An arrow, a line with an arrow on both ends, durative. In fact, instead of dinking around with that, and we'll just pass you out this little thing. Keep swing parsing to you. A little bit. Okay, see the three kinds of action? Durative, undefined, and perfected. Okay, we'll talk about this a little bit more. Remind me to talk about this when we come back from the break. But you can see the three kinds of action, right? All right, now, the primary import of a Greek tense is kind of action. What tenses are durative? Present and imperfect. Okay. What tenses are undefined? Aorist and future. What tenses are perfected? Perfect, perfect, and pluperfect. Okay, very good. Now, time is a secondary significance of Greek tenses in the indicative mood, right? So if you have a present, active, or whatever, indicative, when did the action probably happen? Now, if you have an aorist indicative, when did the action probably happen? In the past. If you have a future indicative, when did the action probably happen?
It hasn't yet.
In the future. Okay, it hasn't yet. Right. Now, if you get outside the indicative mood, what's the significance of a Greek tense?
Probability.
Outside the indicative mood, the significance of a Greek tense is what?
Kind of action.
Kind of action entirely. There is no time significance. Now, the subjunctive mood is the mood of probability or possibility. There's also an optative mood in Greek, which is less probable than the subjunctive mood. So I might go to the store, or I might go to the store. The first is subjunctive, the second is optative. That's why when Paul says in Romans, should we continue in sin that grace might abound, he says, me genoita, which is an optative of genomai, being translated means, may it never be. So it's a very strong way of saying, let's not do that. Let's not even make it a potential that we would think about sinning so that grace may increase. All right? So if the subjunctive mood is the mood of potentiality or the mood of probability, what does that tell you about the action described by the subjunctive mood? It has not happened yet. I might go to the store. Now, when is that action going to occur? If it occurs. In the future. So the action in the subjunctive mood is always an action of the future, if at all. Huh? No. I might have a present subjunctive. I might have an aorist subjunctive. By the time we're done, you're going to know why there's no future subjunctive. If I have a present subjunctive, if I say, I might go to the store, but it's present, how would you translate that differently? I might be going to the store. Or I might, may or might is about the same thing, but I may, well, no, that's different. I might be at the store is kind of different than I might be going to the store. But the idea is, I might be continually on my way to the store. Yeah. Or the present. One use of the present is I might keep on going to the store. I might habitually go to the store. Right. If I didn't have a garden, I might, present tense, be going to the store. Now, if I didn't have a garden, I might be going to the store in the present tense. Could be translated very easily. If I didn't have a garden, I might have to keep going to the store. Right? That's a present tense of a subjunctive. What about aorist? If I said I might go to the store, that is just simply, I might go to the store. Period. Not saying anything about how I'm going to the store.
What about I might have gone?
Well, that would be a perfect, and those exist, but they're extremely rare, especially in the New Testament, so we don't even worry about those. But that's good English. I might have gone to the store.
I might could go to the store.
In English, think of that. I might could go to the store. Well, yeah,
That
that's,
would be Texan.
yeah.
It's Texan.
They say that.
It's in some
I
places.
came up earlier today. I used it.
So did you really?
Yeah.
I might could go to the
He
store.
always said might could.
Yeah, I say Mike is pretty often.
So what does that actually mean? What if there's
May
actually
be able to.
what if there's actually a grammatical significance to this?
It's I might be able to. That's what
I might be able, yeah, that's what it means, isn't it? Yeah, I might be able to sort. And here's another one. I don't know in what parts of the country this is said, but I do know that people from Oklahoma say this. And I don't know if it's in Texas or not. But I'm gonna go to the store. You ever hear that?
They don't say, they don't use
We,
that.
Texas
They
doesn't say
say-
that, that
they say
is
I'm fixing to.
Oklahoma.
Okay, that's Oklahoma. I'm gonna go to the store, or
Vixen.
I'm gonna give you a whipping.
They don't say that in Italy too. Oh, I'm gonna break in your face.
Well, I don't know how it works in the Italian thing, but there, I think there's a grammatical significance to that in Oklahoma. I'm a gonna. When they put the, I was a driving to the store. You ever hear that? You know, I knew a guy in Phoenix, actually, I think he was from Oklahoma. My dad's side of my family's from Oklahoma, so that's the way my grandmother would talk. I was a driving to the store. Now, what does that mean? I think there's a grammatical significance to that. I think that is a way of making an English verb durative. I was a driving to the store, or I was a fixin' dinner, or I'm a fixin', you know, something's happening here. Rather than just saying I'm fixing to smack you. You know, it's more urgent. I'm a fixin', I'm in the process of preparing to strike you, is what this means. So you see that whether you have a present subjunctive or an aorist subjunctive, the action referred to is potential, therefore it hasn't happened yet. Therefore, if it happens, it's going to be in the future. Right? So what would the forms of a future subjunctive look like?
Depends on the nature of the action.
The forms of a future subjunctive.
Just like the air.
Just like the aorist. What would the grammatical significance of a future subjunctive be?
If something, then this will happen. That essentially the answer.
Well, you introduced a conditional clause to that, which you can do in the present or the aorist. What would be the significance of the future subjunctive, if there were one? See, that, the subjunctive in English, did you know that? If there were one? You know, a subjunctive in English, you see one, right? They always mess that up on the news. The newsreaders always mess that up. It's not if there was one. It's if there were one. Why is it were? Because it's subjunctive. If, right? Yeah, I'm seeing blank stare. You don't believe me, do you?
Yeah, well, I believe you guys.
Even though subjunctive in English.
We're trying to.
We're
trying to
learning
figure
English
out-
while we're learning Greek.
Well, that's
here,
what happened to me
so.
too. All right, what's the significance of the aorist, or the, I'm sorry, the future tense? Because remember, time
Does it get a little more,
time is not an issue in the subjunctive. So what would be the significance of the future tense outside the indicative as compared to the aorist?
I'm gonna go with it would.
You'd be right. So that's why we don't need a future subjunctive, because it would mean exactly the same thing as an aorist subjunctive, because both are undefined in their action.
Neither of them will happen.
Neither of them have happened yet. So, I don't know, I mean, we could have called that a future subjunctive, I guess, because it looks like a future subjunctive, but it's an aorist subjunctive, just as it forms it, right? So there's no such thing as a future subjunctive. So have you ever attempted to parse something on a test, future subjunctive? Well, it gives the grader a real laugh when you do that, but it's probably not worth losing the point. All right, so there are various uses of the subjunctive mood, and they're on page 139. He leaves out what I think is the core idea of the subjunctive mood, which gets translated in English like might. Did you notice when we did John 3:16? For God so loved the world that he gave his unique son, that whoever, right? What is that? Whoever.
Let's see. That is,
We don't know the who, but it has an
Okay.
option there.
Whoever believes in him, let's see what the actual, so that, he gave the only begotten Son, in order that everyone believing, is literally what it is, it's participle, everyone believing in him might not perish, that's subjunctive, but might have life forever. Those are subjunctive. Now, does that mean if you believe in him, you might not perish, and you might have life forever, but you might not? But there's a contingency here, isn't there? What's the contingency? Well, you may or may not believe. See? So there's just and that's a bad example of use of the subjunctive that you can use the word might in English. Right? But there is a use of a subjunctive like I might go to the store. He doesn't get that. But number one here, the hortatory subjunctive in the first person plural. Subjunctives are used as a command. And when we get to the imperative, we'll see that there's only a second and third person form of the imperative, the real command mood, right? Well, how do you give a first person command? Well, you don't really command yourself, but you could command a group including yourself. And the way you would do that would be with a subjunctive in the first person plural. So we call it a hortatory subjunctive. Where do we get the word hortatory? Well, it's like the word exhortation, right? Hortatory. And so you translate it, let us speak to the children and let us comfort them. Let us go into the village and let us buy bread. So that's one important use of the subjunctive. Then you have the deliberative subjunctive used in questions of possibility. Shall we take bread from our children and eat it? Well, if you look at that, you might translate that, we might take bread from our children and we might eat it, but there's a question mark, right? And we might eat it? Well, that's kind of a weak translation. What if you said, let us take bread from our children and let us eat it? Now, if you translate it as a hortatory subjunctive with a question mark, right, you're getting pretty close to the meaning, right? Should we take bread from our children and eat it? See how they get there with that? 3, the subjunctive mood is used to assert strongly that something will not happen. So here we have ume, the double negative. You should never, ever say bad things about my mother. Ume, double negative. Now, and here it has the aorist, so it's made even more strong with the aorist, like a sergeant's command almost. In English, if you have a double negative, it means positive, right? People do that all the time. Right? I don't never do that. Well, here, ume, in Greek, it doesn't work that way. Ume just is a stronger, strengthened negative. Second example, the one who seeks water I will never send into the desert. So you can use a subjunctive mood and ume to make a strong negative. 4, very common use of the subjunctive is to express purpose. Such clauses will typically be used with hina or hapos. So we're going up to the temple in order that we might see these signs. So here we have hina with the subjunctive. Hina expressing purpose in order that we might see these signs. They were seeking the woman so that, hapos, they might hear her word. So here we're using may or might with the subjunctive, aren't we? To indicate purpose. All right. Number 5, the subjunctive is used in future or present general conditional clauses. Those are big words, or at least a bunch of them strung together, a bunch of medium-sized words strung together. But the word eon means if, right? Remember, we've learned 2 words for if now. We've learned a, which means if, and a, well, let's talk about conditional sentences for a second, right? really you have two clauses together. If you have a full-blown conditional sentence, you have two clauses together. If you do that, then, and sometimes the then is expressed and sometimes it isn't. But if then, right? These are if then sentences. If you do that, then you will die. Right? That's a conditional sentence in English. If. And there are two clauses. Why? Because we have a verb and a subject in both of them. If you do that. And we can have indirect objects in the whole thing in that clause, right? If you throw that ball to me. Direct object, indirect object, the whole thing. Right? But the if on there makes it a dependent clause. So the main clause is the then part. Then you will die. So the core of that sentence is you will die. And what modifies that clause is the dependent clause. You will die if you do that. Right? Now, if. In English, if is a word of contingency, isn't it? If means it may or may not happen. And the word in Greek that corresponds best with that is eon, which is a, epsilon iota, we know that, and on together. Right? The other word for if, epsilon iota, that we already learned, is oftentimes, usually even better translated something other than if in English, because there isn't so much contingency in that. You can translate that since or because. In Philippians chapter 2, where Paul says, if there's any encouragement in Christ, if there's any affection and compassion, make my joy complete by being of the same. Well, there are four ifs there, and all four of those ifs are epsilon iota ifs. And so in reality, that means since there is encouragement in Christ.
Cause and effect.
Well, kind of, yeah. But it's just a conditional sentence where the condition is assumed to be true. So it's used with the indicative mood. A with the indicative mood. Since there is encouragement in Christ, since there is affection and compassion, and there are four, I don't remember all four off the top of my head. Since those things, then make my joy complete by being of the same mind. And there are four things there too. Right? So there's a couple of different kinds of conditional sentences. One that assumes the reality of the if clause, and one that assumes the potentiality of the if clause. So the one that assumes the potentiality of the if clause would use what mood? The subjunctive mood. So if you're going to use the subjunctive mood, what if word would you have to use? At on. So you a with the indicative, at on, which is just a plus on, with the subjunctive mood. So that's what he's talking about here in these conditional sentences. There are actually four different kinds in at least traditional grammars of conditional sentences, and we're having two here, and he says we're going to have another one coming. But here, if I receive a gift from them, in this first example, I will write to you. Now, then is not necessary, but sometimes there's a then in there, and sometimes there isn't. But if I receive a gift from them, then I will write to you. Now, what's the core of this sentence? What's the independent clause, in other words?
I will write to you.
I will write to you. The dependent clause is if I receive a gift from you. Because see, I will write to you can stand alone, right? Not that it means the same thing, but you could say, I will write to you. But if you say, if I receive a gift from them, that doesn't really stand alone. But it's very powerful parental language. If you do that again, you stop. And then it leads to the imagination, the then part. But the reason that works is because it cries for completion. So the kid has to try to complete it in his mind. What's going to happen if I do that again? All right. If sinners cry out to the Lord answers. All right. So the subjunctive with et on. All right. Tense and time in the subjunctive mood. As in the case of the participle, tense in the subjunctive has nothing to do with the time of action. Now here's another little tidbit of argument against that statement. Remember you said time has no significance in the participle? It's true in the subjunctive, right? Because all actions described by the subjunctive mood must be, at best, future actions, right? So time is not a function of a tense in the subjunctive mood. Therefore, you do not have both an aorist and a future subjunctive, because they would be ambiguous in meaning. Well, ambiguous isn't the right term. They would be synonymous in meaning. That's the right term, right? They'd mean the same thing. You do have an aorist and a future participle. What does that tell you? It tells you that there must be some time significance to a participle. But it's never an independent time significance. It's always a time significance, what? In relation to the main verb. Is it always? Can it be pushed off of that? It can be pushed off of that. And the reason is, how would you describe, using Greek grammar, a participial action concurrent to the main verb, but the action is undefined? Well, you'd have to use an aorist. But you'd expect the aorist to describe an action preceding the main verb. But if you really insist on using a participial action concurrent to the main verb, but undefined, you're forced to use an aorist, and you're hoping that the context will let the reader know that this action must be concurrent to the main verb, right? In other words, the logic of it requires that the action is concurrent, but since you use an aorist, you're telling the reader that the action is undefined, or you want that kind of impression with the reader. You see what I'm saying? Conversely, how would you describe a durative action that comes before the action of the main verb? You'd be forced to use a present, and you would hope that the logic of the context would help the reader understand that the action really had to logically be before the main verb, right? But that the action was durative. Drowning, I died. Well, you got to drown first and then you die. But drowning was a process, and I want you to know that, right? So I'm going to use a present participle. So can you use them otherwise? Absolutely, and there are reasons for doing that. But what is the what is the typical? There certainly is. I think there certainly is a time reference to a participle, not independently, right? There is a time reference to an adverbial participle, usually indicating when the action of the participle happens in relation to the main verb, or at least often there is. And I think a good argument for that is that you have both aorist and future participles. Why? Because you can have action before the main verb, and you can have action after the main verb. If in fact there were no time significance at all in a participle, then you would not need, right? Are you following me? A future participle.
Yes. Help me tie that back into this. I guess I lost your train of thought.
Well, he's saying in the case of the participle, as in the case of the participle, tense in the subjunctive mood has nothing to do with the time of action. That's true of the subjunctive mood. I'm saying it's not true of the participle.
Oh, okay.
He's jumped on a bandwagon that I think is wrong. But, again, why do we understand the action as coming before the verb? Is it the context alone that gives us that clue? Or is it the context in conjunction with the tense of the participle? Now, to me, as soon as you said most of these work this way, most of these work that way, but there are exceptions. I think you're just admitting that the tense has at least an affinity to be used in that way. And since it matches what happens in the indicative mood, it's not pretty hard for me to imagine, what's going on. Does that make sense to you?
So you think nothing, when he says, as in the case of participles, the tense in the subject has nothing to do with it. You think nothing's too strong a word for participle, but not for subject.
But not for the subjunctive. Exactly. An aorist subjunctive, for example, does not denote action in past time. Indeed, all tenses of the subjunctive denote potential action, therefore tend to refer to future time. It is usually the case, as is usually the case outside the indicative tense, and the subjunctive pertains to kind of action. The distinction between a present and an aorist subjunctive cannot always be expressed in an English translation, which is exactly why you're taking Greek. Now we have the subjunctive of Amy, and again, you get a gift. O-H-A, omen, Ada, O-C.
And then always have this.
So is that like I might be?
Yes, right. So are we clear why there's no future subjunctive?
Yes.
Cyrus?
Yeah, I think so.
Can you tell me why?
Good things there.
So there you go.
But most all of them going to happen.
Cool. All right. Bottom of page 142, where you see the New Testament section of the homework beginning, please do every third one of those. 3, 6, 9, 12.
Just New Testament?
Yep. Okay, lesson 24. Hope we're not lingering over these too long for you.
Say that again.
Okay. Just repeat the vocabulary word after me. Agapetos.
Agapetos.
Beloved. Now, what kind of word is that? What part of speech is that?
Adjective.
How do you know? Okay, because you get 3 different endings, right? Because an adjective has to modify, it has to agree with the noun it modifies in gender, number, and case. So we have to have all 3 genders, because beloved could modify a noun that is masculine or feminine, or it could modify a noun that's neuter, right? But there's another reason that you know it's an adjective. Why? No, it doesn't give you an article. Okay, there's a it might, but it doesn't. But that's a good observation. There's another reason though.
Agape love.
Well, atos is kind of an adjectival sort of ending for a Greek word, so that's another reason. But there's still another reason. No, you could have another noun. Well, the translation is an English adjective, right? So we're probably going to translate a Greek adjective with an English adjective. All right, so agapetos, beloved. Arche.
So is that ever used? Oh wait, it's an adjective. It can be used substantive.
Can be used substantive. Beloved, let us love one another. You know that song? Beloved, let us love one another. First John 4:17. The rest of the people at the worship committee meeting I had when we were picking songs, they didn't know that song. Anyway, arche,
Arche.
beginning or ruler. Glossa,
Glossa.
tongue, language. Glossolae. Ani, to be, the infinitive of ami. So that's kind of not a vocabulary word, that's kind of a, it's not really a principal part either, it's just a form of ami, right? I mean, it's a vocabulary word, it's in our list, and you need to know it, but it's not a vocabulary form of a word. You see what I mean? Okay, exestin.
Exesti.
It is lawful, so you can see that has a movable mood. Theoreo, another one of those valley words. I look at or behold theory. Pretty good, eh? Keluo. I command. Martureo. I witness, bear witness to, or testify. Martyr comes to mind. Eyewitness new. Paidion. Infant or young child. Parabole. Parable. Or proverb. Notice that parable is just a transliteration of that. Parable. What does that mean?
More vocab like that.
Let's tear this up. Yeah, let's tear this word apart a little bit and see if we can understand its etymology. How did it come about? 2 words. What 2 words? Para. Bala. Okay. So literally, it means to what?
Throw alongside.
To throw alongside. To cast alongside. In the sense that it means to compare. I'm going to throw this alongside that and compare it. Right? So it's a comparison. So the kingdom of heaven is like a sower going into a field, and he sows. Some on good, you see what I'm saying? So a parable is a comparison. So Jesus uses parables as a way of teaching heavenly truths with earthly stories. So Jesus really in parables is comparing the kingdom of heaven to earthly existence, isn't he? Kind of like he said to Nicodemus, if I told you spiritual things, how would you get it? You're not even getting the comparison I'm making to my terminology, to physical things in spiritual things. You must be born again. We learn by analogy, don't we? When we are learning Greek, we are trying very hard to learn from our understanding of English grammar and go from that to Greek grammar. Right? Here's how you translate a subjunctive. I might go to the store. Oh, now you kind of understand a little bit about the subjunctive. Now, when you get into certain Greek contexts and see subjunctives, you're going to have to force yourself to think Greek a little bit, right? And learn not from direct analogy to the way English works, but from indirect analogy to the way grammar works, and you can make those indirect kind of jumps in terms of your learning, right? When Greek is hardest for us is when it is least like English, because we're learning by analogy. It's not really that the Greek is so hard, it's just that it's not like English, really, right? And that's why it's very difficult for us to understand the incarnation, because what is analogous to the incarnation? Nothing really. That's why it's so difficult for us to understand the Trinity. What is analogous to the Trinity? Nothing. Now, people try to use water and eggs and all kinds of things as analogies to describe the Trinity. And we have to be kind about that because they're useful. But we always know that there is really no true analogy to the Trinity. Right? So at the end of the day, can we understand the Trinity? Not really. Some, but not really. It sort of, Trinity forces beyond our ability to understand it because it's not analogous to anything that we directly experience. So that's why those things are so difficult to understand. All right, parable. Pra. Before, with the genitive. All right, Sophia.
Sophia.
Wisdom. And hoste. So that, often with the infinitive. All right, have you had infinitives at all?
Yep.
Thought so. Okay, so infinitives are verbal nouns. Participles are verbal adjectives. Infinitives are verbal nouns. It's a verbal noun because it takes a verbal idea, throwing. Verbs are action words typically, right? Except for verbs of being, which are being words. But throwing. Take that word and force it to function like a noun. Throwing. To throw. To throw is fun. To err is human. To forgive, divine. See, I just took those verbal ideas, forced them to function like nouns, and made them the subject of the sentence. To err is human. To forgive is divine. So that's all I'm doing. And an infinitive is infinite instead of finite. Why? Because a finite verb is finite because it's limited to a person and number. Present, active, indicative, and it's going to be first, second, or third, singular, or plural. In other words, there is a certain limitation to the possible subject of that verb. Right? It's either going to be a first person, second person, or third person, but it can't be all of them. It's either going to be singular or plural, and it can't be both of them, one or the other. Right? So a finite verb is limited in terms of what kind of subject you can attach it to. It expresses a limitation, in other words. An infinitive does not express that limitation. An infinitive is parsed like present, active, infinitive. full stop, right? You don't have to give a person a number. So,
Why would you say present? I mean, history.
okay, to err. Now, who could have erred at that point? I could have erred. You could have erred. He, she, it could have erred. We could have erred. You all could have erred. They could have erred. You see, that's why it's
So, like,
infinitive.
if
I know,
it's-
but I got you. I heard you. All right. But in English, to err, I'm pretty much stuck with it. But do I mean to keep on erring, or to err habitually, or do I mean just to make a mistake? So a present infinitive is going to be a durative mistake, which is not the kind you like. An aorist infinitive is going to be an undefined mistake. And maybe the worst kind of mistake at all is the perfect infinitive, which is the kind of mistake you make, and it keeps coming back to haunt you. The results continue. Now that's if the word in the infinitive is a mistake. Right? Because you could have to bless. And so you could have a durative blessing, or an undefined blessing, or a blessing that happens and the results continue.
A blessing that keeps on blessing?
Hmm?
A blessing that keeps on blessing, would that be kind of a perfect, or like a perfect use of it?
You could do that, or even present. But
Oh, yeah.
no, we don't even worry too much about the perfect infinitive because it's pretty rare and it's easy to recognize really when you see it. So our infinitive endings are ain, estai, psi, sostai, thenai. Right? Those five. Are you pretty much comfortable with those infinitive endings? Present, active, present, middle, passive, aorist active, aorist middle, aorist passive. Infinitive endings. Those are middle of page 145.
Yeah, so we need to learn the other ones?
I wouldn't worry about learning the perfect. You can just recognize it. First of all, you know it's perfect because there's reduplication probably, right? So that's going to be pretty easy. Can I and sty, well, the kappa is also going to clue you to a perfect. And then, can I looks a lot like psi, so it might clue you to an infinitive ending. Besides that, usually in the context, it's not going to be that hard to realize you're dealing with an infinitive, especially if there's an article with it, because infinitives can have articles, right? Because it's a verbal noun. So if you have a verbal kind of word, luo, well, that's oha meta usu, but I have an article with it. You've either got a participle or an infinitive, and can I doesn't remind me of a participle. And then, spy, la loose spy, well, I know that's going to be a middle passive of a perfect. I can kind of figure that out. And that's pretty much like sostai or thenai with that, alpha diphthong sort of thing happening, right? Pretty similar. So I don't know. I wouldn't worry about the perfect infinitive ending. Just know a, estai, psi, sostai, thenai, basically. Thousand infinitive work. The subject of the sentence, first of all. To keep the commandments of God is good, or it is good to keep the commandments of God. Most of the time, by the way, when you want to deal with an infinitive, if you will just give it a to something translation in English, that's going to be a good translation. The infinitives are pretty nice in that way. To keep, or whatever. And I think you'll see in most of these examples that that's the case. You can express purpose with the infinitive. The Spirit sent you to preach the Word of God. Why did the Spirit send you? To preach. And see, again, there's a to translation. So even if you don't understand the usage of the infinitive, if you just say to preach, you got a good translation for it, right? To express result. The woman healed the blind man to marvel the crowd. Well, the word marvel is not really used that way in English, right? So that the crowd marvel. Next one, the infant died. Now here's where the to translation kind of falls down. The infant died with the result that his mother did not have peace. The infant died the mother not to have peace. Right? Well, the result. Now, you need to understand that purpose and result are very close concepts, right? Because if I purpose something, if I do something for a certain reason, I want this to happen, then there's some likelihood that that's going to happen and be the result, right? So, for example, they were taken to the authorities to be crucified. Well, is that purpose? Is that why they were taken to the authorities? Or is that the result of them being taken to the authorities? And sometimes it's very difficult to tell. These are clear examples, as you'd imagine he'd pick clear examples, which is a good thing. But sometimes the examples are not really that clear. You'll see that when you read. Purpose is quite well expressed by to in English, but result is not, is it? To express time. Before he entered the temple, I spoke to him. So before the entering, with reference to him into the temple, right? Well, that's a time thing. There's something that I need to tell you that we didn't read in the text yet, and that is that he calls it the subject of the infinitive, and that's okay. But strictly speaking, can an infinitive have a subject?
Can a noun have a subject?
Right. Can a noun have a subject? No, it can't really have a subject. So from a grammatical standpoint, the infinitive doesn't, strictly speaking, have a subject, but for all intents and purposes, practically speaking, they end up having subjects. In other words, there is another noun in the sentence that indicate what does the action of the infinitive, right? Now here's the point. What case will that be in? What case do you normally expect the subject to be in? Nominative. Will the subject of an infinitive be in the nominative case? No. It will be in the accusative case. Strictly speaking, grammatically, it is an accusative of general reference. So here we have, before he entered the temple. So, from a grammatical standpoint, it is before the entering, with reference to him, right? Well, that's just silly, really, right? In English, you'd want to say before he entered into the temple. But he, auton, is the subject of that infinitive doing the action of entering. Do you get that? Now, can an infinitive have a direct object? Yes. What case will the direct object of an infinitive be in? Accusative. So you can actually have two nouns, both in the accusative, one acting as the subject of the sentence. If there are two nouns and one is man and the infinitive is to pound and the other noun is nail, you can kind of make an assumption that the subject of the infinitive is the man and the direct object is the nail. But, there's a potentiality for ambiguity at that point, isn't there? But usually the context, again, will make it fairly clear what's happening. All right. Finally, the sixth use is cause. The example, the ruler wanted to see the man because he heard about him. All right. So bear those things in mind when you look at infinitives. Any questions on infinitives then? I want to see the part. The bottom of page 144 is where he talks about that. The last paragraph, the subject of an infinitive is in the accusative case. This can be confusing because the direct object of an infinitive is also in the accusative case. If an infinitive has both, only context will determine which is which. Here are examples of infinitives with a subject accusative, with a direct object accusative, and with both. Fine, so here we go. It is good for us to pray often. Right? So where's the infinitive? To pray. Okay? So the core of the sentence is to pray is good. Can you see that?
I'm not seeing where we are.
Bottom of page 144, that example on the bottom of page 144, sorry. Okay? So the first three words are the core of the sentence. To pray is good. Now, what's humas? Well,
You,
us.
or us, yeah.
It's us, and that's the doer of the action of praying. So that's the subject of the infinitive. So, us praying. See, we struggle with that in English, right? But us praying is good. Then you can add the modifier often. Yes.
Could you also read that, it's a good thing to pray for us often? Or would that look good?
Well, you would expect probably that to be in the dative case, I would think. To pray for us.
So you can have.
Or a prepositional phrase. Could it be in the accusative? Yeah, but probably not, because the word pray, I think the word pray, typically, when you're talking about pray for someone, the person you're praying for is in the dative case. But apart from the fact that pray does that, there is that ambiguity with an infinitive. And we'll see that. The next example, the prophet must speak words of peace. What is the infinitive? Well, to speak. Now here, to speak completes the verbal idea, must, right? Ought. In English, ought, to. When we say ought in English, we want to complete that. The prophet ought to, and so the infinitive is to speak, and lagus is the direct object of the infinitive, to speak word. Next example, that evil man does not want you to know the truth. Now, what's the infinitive? To know. Now, who must is in the accusative, and that's who's not supposed to know, so that's the subject of the infinitive, if you want to use those terms, right? And tein aletheon is the truth, and that's the direct object of the infinitive. That's what you're not supposed to know. So, who is knowing and what you're knowing? You see that? You to know the truth. Any questions about infinitives and how that all works? So look for the accusatives as subjects and direct objects of the infinitive. Okay, indirect discourse. We can do this fairly quickly, I think. Direct discourse in English requires quotation marks, right? Indirect discourse does not require quotation marks. Example of the first. The man said, I am hungry, in quotes. The man said, comma, quotation mark, I am hungry, close quotes.
Easier.
Yeah, I know, I can see you guys are hungry. I say I've lost you, but I'm continuing on anyway because I'm stubborn. That must have been a Freudian example. Indirect discourse, the man said that he was hungry. Now, you can have, obviously, direct discourse in Greek. Indirect discourse, however, often uses the word hati, which is translated that, right? There is a difference, though, in how it works in English and how it works in Greek. And you can see those examples at the bottom of the page. The direct discourse is on the left, and the indirect discourse is on the right. So in English, I see the man. In indirect discourse, she says that she sees the man. Okay, Greek, blepoton, anthropon, I see the man. In Greek, she says that she is seeing the man. You see that? So that's the same. The difficulty comes in when, see the words that are underlined in English when you start changing tenses. I see the man. She said that she saw the man. Now, did you see how the verb that the woman used changed tense to match the verb that the person used to indicate when she said it? Did you see that? She said that she saw the man. In Greek, she said that she is seeing the man. The tense of the verb doesn't change in Greek, where it does in English. You see that? All right. I will see the man. She said that she would see the man. In Greek, she said that she will see the man. So you don't have a change of tense in Greek like you do in English. I saw the man. She said that she had seen the man. She said that she saw the man. All right, well, that's worth meditating on, and you can do that on a full stomach. Hati, introducing indirect discourse, you shouldn't really have too much trouble with that. On page 149, the New Testament section, do every third one in the New Testament section. You guys don't come without eating dinner before you get here, do you? You do?
So, yeah, today we did.
That would be miserable.
Oh, we kinda ran out of time today.
We better stop. We should bring like, you know, those little packets of crackers with peanut butter on them or
As
something.
soon as I noticed, I came off of work.
That's commitment, isn't it? I'm telling you, that's laudable commitment. Well, all right, you better go get something to eat. How fast can we, say it's 8 o'clock, when can we get back?